Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel at this time of the day. I am Teacher Faith. This is the channel where we make mathematics and biology a booster subject at the comfort of your home. So today's tutorial, we want to define the word life so that we can be able to discuss these distinguishing features that are seen in living things and are not seen in non-living things. I am going to discuss the first 4 characteristics of living things in this tutorial, and then in later date we are going to look at the remaining 4 characteristics. Whether it is plant or animal, whether it is unicellular or multicellular, whether it is green or non-green plant, whether it is a mammal or an insect, whether it is so tiny, it means for organism to have life, then it has to show these characteristics. And the first characteristic is nutrition. Nutrition is simply defined by the process of an organism that has life to acquire and utilize food material. So when we talk of acquiring, we are talking of whether the organism has that ability to make its own food, or it has the ability to feed on already made food. Now, in this feature that is seen in all living organisms, we are going to look at two groups of organisms. These are the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. So for us to discuss these two groups of organisms, first of all, we have to understand that all organisms need to feed for them to survive. And the main biological reason as to why organisms must feed is, one, to use the food material as part of its body, or to give the organism the energy that it will use in order to carry other biological processes. And remember, even nutrition is one of the biological process. So I want to start with the first group, the autotrophs. The autotrophs, they acquire their food by the process of either chemosynthesis or photosynthesis. These organisms are able to synthesize their own food. So in the process of chemosynthesis, majority of these organisms are bacteria. Bacteria use chemical to synthesize their own food because they lack green coloring matter that is used by green plant through the process of photosynthesis with the combination of carbon dioxide and water to make simple sugars that they use for energy or is used as part of their body. These organisms are the primary source of food material in the ecosystem. Let us look at this other group that comprises of the organisms known as heterotrophs. They are called heterotrophs because they rely on already synthesized food. They feed on either plants, fresh, or both plant and fresh. So these groups of organisms, depending on how they acquire their food, I am going to categorize them into 4 groups. The first group acquire their food by the process known as Anozoic. This group of organisms comprises of the carnivorous, the herbivorous, and the omnivorous. They ingest food, they digest it, and then they ingest it. So when you talk of ingesting, we mean that they introduce food in the mouth, they break it down physically, mechanically and chemically, so that the food material is absorbable in the body, and then they eliminate, they ingest the indigestible and the unabsorbed food material out of the body by the process known as ingestion in form of feces. This group comprises of carnivores that feed on fresh meat, herbivores that feed on plants, and omnivores that feed on both plants and animals, and example of these organisms are human beings and pigs. Let us look at another category that acquire their food through the process of parasitism. Parasitism is a process of acquiring food material which involves a relationship of two organisms, the parasite and the host. The host is the one that suffers, but the parasite is the one that benefits from this kind of relationship, because the parasite gets nutrient from the host, but the host is deprived of the nutrient, and therefore in this kind of relationship it ends up suffering. And we have two types of parasite. There are those that are found on the outside of the body of the host, and there are those which are found inside the body of the host, leading us to a group of parasites that are known as endoparasite. And those that are found on the outside of the body of the host are known as ectoparasite. And examples of ectoparasite are like the ticks, they are the fleas, the bedbugs, among others that you might be aware of. Examples of the endoparasite may include the plasmodium. These are they come in different species. We have the tapeworms, and we know there are many worms that are found in the body of host, and to mention but a few, the schistoma, among others. Another category of organisms that are heterotrophs, they acquire their food material through a process of saprophyticism. Saprophyticism, this is the process by which organisms acquire food material from dead decaying matter. How do they get nutrients from already dead and decaying matter? These organisms have the ability to excrete some enzymes that perform extracellular digestion to release nutrients from dead matter. And majority of these organisms are bacteria and fungi. The examples of bacteria, if I may mention a few, are like the rhizobium that is found in the roots of legumes, bacilli, the cocci bacteria, among others, just to mention a few. And examples of fungi are like the mushrooms, the yeast, the mildews, among others, just to mention a few. We have another group of organisms that exhibit symbiosis form of nutrition, and this form of nutrition, it involves a relationship between two organisms where they have mutual benefits. So this one is a bit different compared with the parasitism, where one of the organism benefits and the other one suffers. So in symbiosis, both organisms benefit from this relationship. And a good example of this form of nutrition is seen in Rhizobium bacteria that is found in the roots of legumes. And how do the two organisms benefit from each other? The bacteria that are in the root of the legumes, an example of legume plant is like the bean plant. So the bacteria will benefit by getting a shelter and food, and the legume will benefit from the nitrate that has been synthesized by the bacteria. So the two organisms are benefiting and neither of them is suffering from this kind of relationship. Another good example is seen between the relationship of the bacteria in the rumen of the ruminants, whereby the bacteria get the shelter and the food that it needs, and the ruminant will use the enzyme cellulose that has been produced by bacteria to digest cellulose to produce glucose, which they use for energy. Therefore, both organisms benefit from each other. Let us look at another characteristic that is seen in living things that distinguishes them from non-living things. And characteristic number 2 is growth and development. I want you to know that growth is different from development, whereby growth is permanent increase in living matter, which is accompanied by increase in size and mass, and this one is possible through 3 processes: the process of assimilation, the process of cell division, and the process of cell enlargement. Whereas development involves changes in the body shape, form, and complexity. But when we talk of growth and development as a characteristic, we are talking of irreversible increase in the size of an organism that is accompanied by complexity of body parts. Okay, for better understanding of this feature, when we talk of specialization or when we talk of differentiation, we are talking of changes in shape. We have a mental picture of a cell, a tissue, or an organ being more specialized to perform a specific function. And I will give an example of development in plant. When we talk of development in plant, if we can narrow down to the general structure of a plant cell, we know the cells that have been differentiated have slight modification so that these specialized cells can perform a specialized function. And therefore, a good example in this case is a Gantt cell. A Gantt cell is a plant cell, but it's different from the general plant cell because it has undergone development in the sense that its shape has changed, its form has changed, and it has become more complex. That is why we are talking of growth and development. Okay, so when you talk of changing form and when you talk of changing shape, form, and complexity, in the case that we are discussing of a Gantt cell, the inner wall of the Gantt cell becomes thick and the outer wall is thin, and due to these changes, it makes the Gantt cell to have a different shape, a shape of a bean, so that this Gantt cell is able to perform a specialized function of controlling the opening and the closing of the stomata. And another good example is the root hair cell. The root hair cell has also been modified in such that it has hair-like structures. These hair-like structures enable them to absorb water and mineral salt in the sense that the distance covered by these molecules of water and minerals is reduced for fast absorption. Maybe another example in plants, we can talk of the nerve cell. From the knowledge we have of the cell of an animal and the cell and the nerve cell, if we try to compare the two, they are very different. And the nerve cell has been modified, has developed, has been differentiated. So the shape, the form, and its complexity has been enhanced, such that it has some branches-like structures that are known as dendrites, axon, marine sheath, among other structural changes, for it to be able to carry out a specialized function of transmitting nerve impulses. How about the sperm cell? The sperm cell is more complex compared to a general animal cell. It has a tail-like structure to help it propel when it is going to fertilize an ovum in the fallopian tube. It has an acrosome that produces enzyme. It has increased number of mitochondria so that it have enough energy to swim to the fallopian tube for fertilization. So when you talk of growth and development, those are two biological processes. But for an organism to be a living one, but if an organism does not carry out these processes, then it ceases to be a living organism. So that is why we are saying that for all living organisms, they have to undergo growth and development. The other distinguishing characteristic is reproduction. What is reproduction? Reproduction is the ability of an organism to produce a new individual of the same species, of the same kind, from the existing mature species. This is very important for all living organisms because it enhances existence and continuity. So for an organism to be living, then it has to show this important biological process, reproduction. Another important feature is irritability and sensitivity. When we talk of irritability and sensitivity, we are talking about organism being able to detect changes in the environment and respond to those changes, or simply ability to detect and respond to stimuli. Stimuli are the changes in the environment that bring about change in the behavior of how the organism operates. And for any living organism, it has to show this basic feature. For today, I'm going to stop at that point so that we continue with the remaining 4 in the next tutorial. Let's share, and may God bless you as you purpose to subscribe.